get that going there in John 6, verse 30 through 35. Get the microphone going. What claim does Jesus make in verse 35? What does he say?
He's the bread of life.
He is the bread of life. So what does this mean for all men?
Salvation.
Salvation. Yeah, it floats into salvation in the clearest sense as you get the rest of the Bible together. Christ, the bread of life, could be the theme of this grand chapter, but it's not quite understood as well. So look at verses 5 through 15 just to remind us, and you'll recall that this is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Different aspects are given there. We'll mention a couple of those from Matthew, I think, this morning. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, seeing a great multitude coming toward him. He said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" But this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what are they among so many?" Then Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish as much as they wanted. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing is lost." Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, "This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world." Then verse 15 puts everything in perspective here. Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself alone. Let me get a drink real quick. Throat all set. Okay. Look at man's answers to the problem. This is what we were looking at last Sunday, just to bring it back to us. Get rid of the difficulty. You read all the accounts, send the multitude away, and let them get their own food, kind of idea. Count the resources and decide it's too difficult. We just can't do it. Look, we only got so many denarii, we can't even give them a little bit. So it's just not possible. So, and then the question comes, what is so little among such need? And we have the same problems. What are the disciples missing that causes these responses?
This is not a normal circumstance.
What is unusual here? What is so?
The Son of God's with
The Son of the bread of life is here before you. That's what you're missing. And you know what? You ever get blindsided by life and miss that? Yeah. Problem gets so big, just doesn't seem like, and you forget who you serve. So would you agree this does not seem possible? If we just took it without Christ.
Physically, no.
Physically to man, yeah, this is not possible. Look, we gave you Lyon County. In Lyon County, and this is December 2022, I got the latest one I could get, and they found 9,101 residents here. In Matthews County says it's 5,000, not counting women and children. So you add the women and children, you could easily double the amount, right? So you just try to imagine that. Someone has give you the charge today, go feed them all. Go feed all Lyon County today. Well, that's just a chore. If they were all gathered here and somehow we're going to feed them. Boy, that in and of itself would be enough to get us swirling in our brains. So Jesus says they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. So he's putting it on the disciples to see this. So do you suppose they're going to learn some things from this?
That's why he did it.
That's why he did it.
He's always teaching.
He's always, thank you, Anthony. That is absolutely on mark. Every miracle is a teaching that is taking place. I know it's a miracle, it's a great miracle, but many miracles weren't recorded in the Gospel of John. He tells us specifically, these are why? That you may believe. So here's evidentiary things. If it's evidence, then that's teaching. It appeals not simply to your need to be healed. Who doesn't need to be healed of something today? Yeah, everybody's got something, right? Even when we were younger, we probably had a little something we needed. But as we get older, those problems increase, and we kind of look at these things a little bit differently. Maybe we wish, but always know there's a teaching going on. Not just here, but everywhere. So look at John 6, verse 9. There's a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many? Now, I studied this a little bit, and the barley loaves are not like we think of big loaves of bread, like we can walk in the, oh, we're so rich. You can walk into a store in town. I'm guessing they're not out of bread this morning, and there's different, right, all kinds of variety, loaves of bread. It's already sliced for you, wrapped up, and all you got to do is pay for it, carry it home. And no, this would have been homemade, and they would have been barley loaves like this, probably the size of a Frisbee, if you can remember what those were, disc-type shape. The Jews had this aversion to leaven in general, so it may not even been leaven at all. If it did, it had a little leaven in it, but not much. So, what is available?
What's on hand?
What's on hand? 5 loaves. And these fishes, by the way, these are not like a meal like you're going to go someplace and get a fish dinner. These are kind of like what we'd call hors d'oeuvres. These are those little side things that you might have. Anybody eat the sardines in a can? No way, Tim says, like coconut to him. Sardines in a can might come, to mind when you're thinking about these fishes. So it's not much, but were 5 loaves and 2 fishes greater than they imagined? They didn't know they had that. Sometimes it's a good thing to sit down and say, count your blessings, right? Because what do you find when you count your blessings? It's more than you ever thought, right? That's why we say that so often in this place. So go to Matthew 14. Matthew 14, look at 18 through 21. Jesus said, He said, bring them here to me. So he's talking about that 5 loaves and those 2 fishes. Then he commanded the multitudes to sit down on the grass, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes. Looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitudes. So they all ate, all of them ate, and were filled. So not only did they eat, didn't eat just a little, they were all filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of the fragments that remained. Now those who had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So there's that for you as well. So you get down to that. What is the divine answer to our problems? Look at verse 18. I don't care what your problem is.
Start and take care of it.
Yeah, look at here's the answer right there. Bring them here to me. What is Jesus saying to you? I'm the bread of life. Is that message for just them?
No.
That's for us. What's your problem? Bring them here to me. Whatever you have, you bring it to me. Bring them here to me. So there's the divine answer. Let's think about that from a practical application. What are we told to do in Mark 16, verse 15? Go ye into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. Wow, look, Dave, there's just a few of us here. We don't have our resources. Yeah, we're doing pretty good with the budget, but we don't have great resources. We don't have, how are we going to do all this? What could we possibly do? We've got 5 loaves and 2 fishes. What do you think we ought to do? Bring them here to me. Get them to Jesus and just do. The can't part of that is what stops us. I used to think it was our fear. I know we get fear and intimidation mixed in there, but that usually isn't until you get to the point of knocking on the door and you're a little nervous. Or you open up your mouth and you start, if you meditate on that fear and intimidation, I get where that could shut you down, but it usually starts with a can't. I can't, someone else can't. So I can't, let the big dogs do it. I don't know where we got that idea. Who's this message to? Well, you could argue it's to the apostles, so they're the big dogs. But who do you see doing it in the book of Acts?
All disciples.
All disciples. We have in Acts 8. Acts 8 verse 4. They went everywhere. Both men and women went everywhere preaching the gospel. So that's kind of important. Carrying that message is the idea. How should we approach this great need? Just keep saying it.
Bring it to me.
Yeah, bring it to me. There you go. bring it to Jesus. Should we say let them go and figure it out for themselves? You know, some people are out there studying their Bible. Surely there's somebody. Wayne, Cheryl's dad, was studying his Bible hard. We had no idea how much he knew until he opened up to us and he wanted to be baptized. I can't say it had much to do with him being converted. He was watching us for a year, but, you know, you say, well, example's important, sure, but he's studying. Well, let them all do it that way. Just study on their own, watch my example, and maybe that's how they'll get it. Is that okay? That's kind of like what they were saying. You know, get the problem out of my face and let someone else take care of it. We could count the resources. Time, I'm really busy, you're really busy. We don't have a whole lot of money. We don't have a lot of time. We got all these other responsibilities. We just can't. We just can't. That shuts that down pretty good. There's so few of us. What is that to so many? There are 9,101 souls in this town.
If it were you, it would be a problem. If it was just us.
If it were just
We
us.
have God.
Yeah. We have the bread of life, right?
Yeah, you lay those things on him. Just do what he says. He'll take care of the rest.
Yeah. Yeah. So look at John 6, verse 8 and 9. Excellent. Look at John 6, verse 8 and 9. That's the main lesson I wanted to get this morning. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many? You go over to John 1. Look at John 1, verse 40 and verse 41. One of the two who heard John speak and followed him was Andrew. There's Andrew. We met him before. What did he do? Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He first found his own brother Simon and said to him, we have found the Messiah, which is translated the Christ, and he brought him to Jesus. Yeah, there's your role. Right there, isn't it? Oh, I brought him to church tonight, and what it says, I get what you mean, and yes, there's a good thing. Invite folks to services. Invite them to Bible study. Invite them to have Bible study. But where are you taking them? Where are you taking them? If Jesus is who he says he is, what do they need? They need the bread of life, just like you need the bread of life. So with that ought to bring joy to you. This is not overwhelming. Bring them to Jesus. Look over at John 12. John 12. Andrew gets another mention. And here we go. Now there were certain Greeks among those who came up to worship at the feast. Now, you know, they can't even go in to the temple area. There are signs up that prohibit them from going into the temple area. They're Greeks. Then they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee, and asked him, saying, Sir, we wish to see Jesus. Philip came and told Andrew, and in turn Andrew and Philip told Jesus. So, is Philip mentioned back there? Yeah. So, now we see Philip doing a little bit more. Andrew again doing his part, but now we got Philip involved. Philip apparently learned something on this occasion. Things got a little bit better. So what's the practical lessons for us? We got it?
Yeah, we can have a hand in bringing people.
We can have a hand. I don't know what that is and what that looks like. It's going to be different for each and every one of us. You have contacts today that I may never meet. True? You know, it just doesn't go to work and everything else. It might be somebody passing through town that you're going to meet that I'm not going to meet. We're trying to have those conversational things. Don't shy away from them. Just enter into a conversation. If it gets to be too long and you've got other pressing things, I understand that, then, you know, get information from them. Would you like to know more? Would you be interested in studying more? I'd like to talk to you more about these things. We're having such a great conversation. I hope we can do this some more. I know you're on the road. Can I get your information? I'll give you my information. You've got those cards back there. I would certainly take advantage of as much of that as you can. A few other lessons here as well. What do we learn about prayer from John 6, verse 11? You know, I don't like to pray in public. I don't want to make a big show at Cracker Barrel. And you better not make a big show at Cracker Barrel. I get your point. But you know what? That doesn't mean you don't pray at Cracker Barrel. What do you find here? Look at John 6, verse 11. There's always a reason to thank God. It may be a small, quiet prayer for just a moment, but you thank God. For that's, Jesus did it.
Now, Jesus is praying here.
Yes.
He's the one praying.
He's the one doing the praying. And it's over food. Yeah. And asking for God to bless it. So we don't want to miss that. What do we learn about God's provisions and wastefulness from John 6? Does God like wastefulness?
No.
If you know anything much about God at all, He doesn't tolerate that. That's the God we serve. He wants us to use our time wisely. Think of all the things we have brought into our realm as good stewards. And I know we're all working on these things, and maybe some do better in certain areas than we do others, but I have to fight this all the time. I don't know about you. I can sit down on Sunday afternoon, and boy, all of a sudden the whole afternoon is gone. You ever do that? You don't have to admit it, but it happens, right? But I want to be a better steward over things like that. As long as my health and abilities are there, I want to use them to God's glory. That's what we're seeing. John 6, verse 13 and 14, is they're gathering up all the fragments. Why are they gathering them up? There's a need somewhere else. Right? God doesn't want that to go to waste. So if you're a waster, stop that. Stop being a waster of things. Don't do that.
Leftovers are good. Here's the passage that proves it.
That's right. Leftovers are good. It is scriptural to have leftovers. Husbands, it's okay. Oh, yeah, a lot of leftovers I enjoy anyway. But John 6, verse 14. For if you forgive men their trespasses, that's Matthew 6. That wasn't right. I didn't get back over to John. John 6, get there, Dave. Verse 14. Okay, then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, "This is truly the prophet who has come into the world." So, what did they conclude from this event?
Christ was who he said he was.
He could do this. Wow.
Because
He's the prophet that, now they're going all the way back in their minds. You have to go all the way back to Moses and think about what Moses said about a prophet. God is going to raise up a prophet like unto me. I know this because of the language and what happens as it goes forward. They're thinking about those things, and they're thinking, unfortunately, in the wrong way about this. We want to discuss that a little bit. This is truly the prophet. What do they mean? Huh?
Like unto Moses.
Like unto Moses. Look at what Moses was able to do. So, this Jesus, it wasn't actually Moses, but that's what they're thinking. It was God who did it through Moses.
And he already touched on this in verse 46 of the last chapter.
Right. Yeah, but a year now has transpired, so I don't know if this is the same audience, but they're still, it's amazing, people are people. These are Jews, and they're all thinking that way. Moses is pretty big in there. Abraham, you think about the characters that are mentioned in the New Testament from the Old, and other than like the book of Hebrews, you've got, in these interactions with these Jews, thoughts that are going to be there. So he's the Messiah, the prophet, like unto Moses. So you get down to John 6, verse 15. Here's the contrast I want you to see this morning. Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself alone. Now, I know we've got a lot to say about that as brethren, but I want you to think about it from that group for a moment. How does this verse reflect the misguided ideas of these people in this audience here? Not this audience, but this audience.
They looking for physical things.
Absolutely. They are hooked on the physical. They are thinking absolutely about the physical. And it's going to help us understand some of the other things, even asking for a sign. I know it's a little bit later there too, but it's only a day later. It isn't like they didn't know about the sign of the bread and the 5 loaves. And, the 5 loaves, 2 fishes on this occasion, right? I read the other one quite a bit. Yeah, 5 loaves, 2 fishes. They know about that. So if Jesus can turn 5 loaves and 2 fishes into food for thousands, what can he do to the Romans?
Obliterated.
Look at what Moses did to Egypt. These Romans don't stand a chance. Now, I don't know how much that's embedded in them, but something's going on, because what do they want to do in verse 15? Take him from didn't think it was possible, seeing it happen, now what do they want to do?
Make him king.
Make him king. So not just praise him as a prophet, they want to make him king. And we might say that's a good thing. Well, all right, what else can he do for us physically as our king? We like this about our kings in the Old Testament.
Dominate everybody.
He can dominate everybody. They all have to pay levies and taxes to us. So what happens to our country?
We're getting rich.
We're all getting rich in the process. How's your belly doing? Oh, you're nice and fat and happy. Right? That's how people think. Right? Just put 2 chickens in the pot and everybody will be happy. Right? You don't think that still works? Sure. Men think that way. It's part of our being. Physically, they're thinking that way. You see it when we get further down in this text, you'll see it even more clearly, I think. What does Jesus' actions in verse 15 indicate about a physical earthly kingdom?
He didn't want any part of it, so he
Didn't want any
left.
part of it. Here was his grand opportunity. If he wanted to lead a rebellion, he's got 10,000 followers. Here we go. That's a pretty good start to, wow. If this is what he wanted to do, overthrow the Romans, take over the world, set up a worldwide kingdom, here was his opportunity. Yeah, sorry.
Same thing in Israel of old. Give us a king so we can be like the nations around us. The problem, you can see the contradiction, of course, based on centuries of false doctrine, so to speak. They want to become Rome. Rome conquered them, now they want to conquer,
We want to be that nation again. So look over John 18. This is stated in many places, but I thought we'll stay in the Gospel of John. Look at verse 36 and 37, and it's stated in other ways. Jesus now talking to Pilate, and at verse 35 is good. Am I a Jew? Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priest have delivered you to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews, but now my kingdom is not from here. Pilate therefore said to him, are you a king then? You see, they wanted to make him a king. Back there in John 6. Are you a king then? Jesus answered, you say rightly that I am a king. What's it mean? Yes, I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Wow, what is Jesus saying about his kingdom, first of all? Spiritual. Spiritual. What a great lesson here, right? You read verse 37 to yourself. Just go ahead and look at that verse. Wow, that is power-packed. And I didn't catch it until, what a great sermon that would make. You might hear it again sometime. But look at that verse. Look, it starts, I am a king. I was born. You could talk about that, right? So look, let me ask you, for what cause is Jesus king? For what cause was he born? Don't start at the end. Look at all of it. Why did he come? He came to be born. He came to bring the word. He came to bear witness to that word. And what else? Yeah, what do you learn? How are his subjects described in verse 37 in this kingdom? They love the truth. Those who hear my voice are of my kingdom. That's it. Woo. Well, that's a power-packed verse, isn't it? I don't know if you saw it that way before, but it's filled with a lot of answers. We looked at this while we were in Colossians. I'm not going to cover it in a lot of detail, but just very quickly. In Luke 17, he says the kingdom of God is within you. It's not like physical kingdoms, but could be translated near. You may have near there as well, or close at hand, those things. But this is a little bit different in the language, and it fits overall with what we're talking about. And I believe this is the correct translation. The kingdom of God is within you. Could discuss it more, but it fits with Basileia. Basileia does have that idea, royal power, kingship, dominion, rule. But in references that we're looking at, like there in John 18 and here in Luke 17, of the royal power of Jesus as the triumphant Messiah. as the King of Kings. So his kingdom, the territory, is that which is subject to the rule of a king. And Jesus is not concerned with land mass. He's not concerned with borders. What's he concerned with? Hearts. Your heart within you. So that's how it's used in the New Testament. That reign or rule of God in my heart. The reign or rule of Christ in my life, in my heart. That's Basileia. That's the kingdom. How does that relate to the church? Remember? Same. How does it relate to the body, which is the church? Same, right? That goes back to Colossians and Ephesians. So churches, men and women, people whose lives reflect the truth of the confession. I believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And your life reflects it, bro. Kingdom, people in whose hearts Christ rules as king. So those go together, don't they? The body are people whose only head is Christ. So those all three go together. Just another way of really saying the same thing, isn't it? So go back to John 6, verse 15 with me. See if I can get the right book this time. John 6, verse 15. Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself alone. What is the focus of the multitude in John 6?
Physical thing.
Physical things. Now,
I'm looking at a free meal every day.
every day, that's exactly right, every day. Think about 40 years in the wilderness. What did they have? Now, they complained about it. We loathe this bread.
They had manna. They had quail.
Yeah.
He provided everything that they needed.
I'll never forget me and my brothers complaining when we had pancakes for a solid week. I think now, how blessed were we that we had pancakes for a solid week with syrup? Well, like we had that king syrup in a can. If you got it, you had to go pick it up. But you got it. You put it on the stove, you heat it up on the gas stove, and it kind of got soft, and you could put it on those pancakes and run home every day from school to get more pancakes. Mom filled up the whole pan with pancakes. Sure, I'll tell you now, all I want is a little silver dollar. But, you know, the multitude, again, men, thinking physical things and complaining about what they got. Yeah, that's so fitting of the wilderness wandering. So that does relate here. So think about this next miracle and then what's about to take place after that, the whole discussion that goes with it. Let's read verse 16 through 21. Now when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into the boat, and went over the sea toward Capernaum. And it was already dark, and Jesus had not come to them. Then the sea arose because a great wind was blowing. Verse 19, now, so when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near the boat, and they were afraid. But he said to them, it is I, do not be afraid. Then they willingly received him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land where they were going. So a couple of questions about this. We got to break it down a little bit. Just know Jesus not with the disciples in the boat. And you can read all the accounts and see what the fullness of how that transpired. The sea is getting rough. Now, the Sea of Galilee, you wouldn't think it'd get that rough, but you know what? It still does. And you put 6 miles from shore to shore, waters out here get rough. Yeah, if you've ever been out there, it don't take much of a lake to scare you when the waters are rough and you're in a small vessel of any kind. The disciples have rowed halfway across. That's 3 or 4, it's about 6.5 miles across. So they're out there in the middle. You're in the middle of the lake. Imagine now, it's not good. And then you see something. Look over Matthew 14. Something else takes place here that is not recorded by John. And you might wonder, well, why didn't he record all this? Why didn't he record all this, by the way? Let's ask that question.
Different perspectives, what they saw.
Yeah, you don't want to lose the perspective. You get very down in the text, and you lose it. You ever lose me in a lesson? You can admit it. It's okay. I do it sometimes. I go off, my intro, and off over here, and you think, what has that got to do with it? That's okay. Every preacher does it occasionally. If I do it all the time, please talk to me about it. But here's in Matthew 14, verse 22. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he sent the multitudes away. So that gives you a little more information. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. More information. Now when evening came, he was alone there. But the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Now in the fourth watch of the night, so it's deep into the night, Jesus went to them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid." But Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." So he said, "Come." And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. Let's stop right there. Again, we don't want to get bogged down in all this, but I want us to make sure. What else happens in this miracle?
Jesus is making the timing perfect.
He's what?
He's making the timing perfect in what he's doing. He goes up on the mountain to pray, and this sets the scene for all that turmoil of water and him being in the middle. And
So again, don't lose sight. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows exactly what. Those disciples need to learn something more about Jesus. They're about to. They are about to. Not just Peter either. All of them. That's John, like us, wants us all to be in that boat so that we can learn together. Right? You see the spiritual application we're reaching for here? So go to Mark's account, Mark 6, just a short portion here of that. Mark 6, verse 51 and 52. Then he went up into the boat to them, and the wind ceased, and they were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure, and marveled. You ever been there? You ever been there? Maybe you have to go all the way. I'm in Mark 6, verse 51 and 52. Mark's account of this. Then he, that is Jesus, went up into the boat to them. The wind ceased, and they were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure and marveled. The only thing I can relate to that is when I obeyed the gospel. The initial obedience, how clear truth was all of a sudden. It's like I just, man, the lights were on, and for one moment, finally, I could see. I could really see things as they really were. And that's powerful stuff. Meditate on that this day. You've had events like that in your life. And it's usually related, when it's the right kind, it's related. I'd say all of them are related to truth. For they had not understood about the loaves, because their heart was hardened. Ooh, we just learned something about our disciples. Yeah. What do we learn about them?
like us.
They're a lot like us, aren't they? They're a lot like us. It's disappointing when the world tells me they can't see it. But boy, when I have brethren and they can't see it, that breaks my heart. That breaks my heart. I desire greatly that something could be done. In verse 52, look at that again. Why did the disciples not understand about the loaves? Say it nice and big and loud. Their hearts were hardened. They didn't understand. Did you learn anything this morning from this one lesson? They did not understand because their hearts were hardened. Who hardened their hearts? They did. The devil did. The Word did. If they're rejecting it, there's a lot going on there, just like with Pharaoh, right? Same idea. Yeah, AJ?
Well, yeah, same, excellent to bring up Pharaoh, because his background, circumstances doesn't allow it. So we say he did. A lot could be said about the religious setting of their day in the context of the real Jesus. Doesn't fit. That goes to the religious authority of the day. They were corrupted, all of them.
Yeah. And
Nation of Israel.
yeah, I'll just put in here, AJ shared an article with me. Well, it was a really good article, but it gave me some insight, this part of it, to the thinking of the day. Why these men would so readily do the things that they were doing. This is Jewish culture. It wasn't unusual for a teacher to rise up and men listen to his teaching and follow after him. That was generally done. And they might do that for a few years, a few months, a few weeks, and then go back home. So that wasn't all that unusual. We look at that and we think, who could possibly do that? They did it all the time. That's why you have all these other people out there who claim to be prophets, claim to be something when they're nothing, and so forth. It happens among us, but in a little bit different way. But now, what are they learning about Jesus in comparison to all those other teachers that have risen up, even in their knowing?
Well, they said it up there in verse 14 of John 6. They said this is the prophet. If they're talking about the definite article, that's something that we need to pay attention to.
Yeah. And his own disciples
He's
weren't
not just
quite,
one of the representatives of the prophets. He is the prophet.
yeah, and his own disciples needed to get a little bit further and deeper in that, yeah.
Yeah, but them saying that, the same bunch want an earthly king, like Moses led them out of Egypt. That's not a full disclosure that they realize it's Jesus.
Right. Yeah, look at Mark 16, verse 14. This is at the end of his ministry on earth. Later he appeared to the 11 as they sat at the table. This is after his resurrection. Hasn't ascended yet. And he rebuked their unbelief and hardness of heart because they did not believe those who had seen him after he had risen. So now that means something to us. What if men today reject the testimony of these great miracles? We've got the testimony. What if men reject that? And they're lost. Why do they reject it? Because of hardness of heart. You say anything else you want to say about it, but that's how God sees it. That's the truth of it. So, what's the lesson for us? Don't do that. Don't be like that. Don't let hardness of heart creep into your life. You know where it starts? It starts with grumbling and complaining about things. Like the bread. We don't have anything to eat. Physical things. We start grumbling and complaining about that. And if you're not careful, you don't think the devil's going to step into that and help you out with some temptations that might draw you away, might keep you from listening. Think how many people conveniently miss services over and over and over again for just about any excuse will do. It's amazing. It's amazing the time we live in, right? And I'm not, look, there are legitimate things that happen to you. I get that. But well, there's a lot of things that just, there's a great lesson here for us. We're rejecting the testimony with hardness of heart. When we reject the Word of God, we reject these miracles. Whether we saw them, isn't that what Mark 16 is telling us? Or we were told by witnesses that are witnesses of God, God's witnesses. What are the apostles and prophets? If not God's witnesses. And we're not going to believe that. You don't think we're going to be rebuked for our unbelief and hardness of heart? It's got to be. Okay. John 16, or John 6, John 16. Got way ahead there, Tim. Get John 6, verse 19 and 20, maybe. So when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near the boat, and they were afraid, but he said to them in his eye, "Do not be afraid." What was Jesus' answer to their fear?
It's me.
Yeah, me again. You have fear? I do. Every day I encounter things. My children, my finances, my health, my this, my that. The lessons, preparing them. Fear pushes in on us in different ways at different times. What do you do with it? Bring it to me. Bring it to me. I am here. So is Jesus here in your life? That's the real question. Is he there? If he's not, if he's someplace else, I understand why you're afraid. You should be. He's not in the boat with you. You should be very afraid. Right? That's a different situation. So, look at Matthew 14. God, I had this many here. Matthew 14, 30 through 30. Yeah. We'll pick that up, and especially jot down, if you would, Matthew 14, verse 33. And the first question is going to be this for next time: the reaction of the disciples to this miracle. Now, it isn't 10,000 that are there, it's just the disciples in that boat. But they needed this, and they learned something from it. And hopefully they didn't just say it, they meant it. We'll pick up there, Lord willing, not next week, but the following week, so we'll have to do a little